This is the first video in my Targaryen Kings series. Wait, what are all these doing here? I've already done 8 videos? I'm on Baelor the Blessed now? It doesn't make sense. Here's what happened. It was a cold, snowy night a few weeks ago, and I was sitting in my chair playing Crusader Kings 2. I fired up my Aegon's Conquest save, and then it hit me. I never made a video about Aegon's reign. I made this video about his life before the Conquest, and I made this video a really long time ago that talks about the Conquest itself, but I never made a video about Aegon's life as king. So that's what this video is, the one you're watching. Consider it a part 2 of my other one. Aegon I's reign can be split up in 2 periods. First, his wars, then his peace. After the Conquest, all of Westeros was under Targaryen control except Dorne. The Iron Islands were fighting amongst themselves to decide who got to be Lord Paramount, and the 3 sisters rebelled and crowned Marla Sunderland. So Aegon commanded Torrhen Stark to put down the Sistermen uprising. A northern army embarked from White Harbor, led by Sir Warwick Manderly, one of the rare northern knights, and they were joined by Queen Visenya on Vhagar. At the sight of the ships and the dragon, the Sistermen deposed Marla for her brother Steffon Sunderland. He bent the knee, and Marla was exiled and imprisoned. 5 years later, her tongue was cut out and she spent her life with the Silent Sisters. Next, Aegon flew Balerion the Black Dread to the Iron Islands, where Qhorin Volmark declared himself the rightful heir of Harren Hoare, whose entire line was extinguished the night Aegon burned Harrenhal. Volmark's grandmother was a younger sister of Harren's grandfather, making him a distant cousin or something. But he was opposed by a barefoot holy man called Lodos, a priest king of the drowned god who was said to work miracles. Other claimants rose too, and the Iron Islands were in chaos. When Aegon arrived, along with ships from Lannisport, the Arbor, Highgarden, and even Bear Island, he slew Qhorin Volmark with Blackfire. Priest King Lodos drowned himself in the sea, and peace resumed at last. Aegon let the Iron Islanders choose their own Lord Paramount, and they decided on Vicon Greyjoy, Lord Reaver of Pike. Next came the First Dornish War, led by Queen Rhaenys on Meraxes and Orys Baratheon's army. King Aegon marched through the Prince's Pass with the Tyrells. Just as they did during the Conquest, the Dornish fighters withdrew and burned all their crops and poisoned their wells, leaving Aegon's massive armies with very little food and water. Orys Baratheon's army was ambushed by archers in the Boneway, and they were all captured or killed, and Orys lost his sword hand. Aegon had more success in western Dorne, capturing Skyreach, Ironwood, and Ghost Hill. At Ghost Hill, Aegon accepted a duel with Lord Tallin's champion, and Aegon killed him in single combat. However, it turned out that the champion was actually Lord Tallin's fool, and Tallin himself had fled. When Aegon arrived in Sunspear, he found it empty except for his sister Rhaenys, who arrived before him. So Aegon declared victory and left Jon Rosby as Castellan of Sunspear. But as soon as Aegon's troops left, the Dornish men re-emerged, taking back all the castles Aegon had captured, and throwing Jon Rosby out of a window. In the Red Desert east of the Hellholt, Lord Tyrell's entire army disappeared, never to be seen again. So Aegon kept fighting Dorne for 7 years, the 2 sides trading atrocity after atrocity. Aegon and Visenya burned defiant castles, while Dornish men burned half the Rainwood. Sir Joffrey Dane, perhaps the Sword of the Morning at the time, attacked Oldtown, burning its farms and villages, so Visenya burned Starfall. Everyone was losing, but Aegon suffered his biggest defeat when his favorite sister wife Rhaenys was shot out of the sky above the Hellholt. So for 2 years, called the Dragon's Wrath, Aegon and Visenya burned every single castle in Dorne 3 times. In the end, it didn't help them conquer Dorne, so I guess they were just letting off some steam. The fighting didn't stop until Maria Martell died and was succeeded by her son Nymor. By then, Dorne was a smoking desert, beset by famine, plague, and blight. Nymor sent his daughter Doria to the Aegon fort to offer peace terms to King Aegon, along with the skull of Meraxes. The contents of Prince Nymor's letter to Aegon are not known. All we know is that Aegon read the letter on the Iron Throne, and his hand was bleeding when he stood up. He immediately burned the letter, flew to Dragonstone, and returned the next morning to accept Dorne's peace. There are, of course, many theories regarding Nymor's letter. Maybe Nymor told Aegon that Rhaenys was still alive, being tortured at the Hellhold, and if Aegon agreed to peace, Rhaenys would be put out of her misery. Another fun theory suggests that Rhaenys confessed under torture that her son Aenys was a bastard, and Aegon was infertile. Nymor would reveal the truth to the whole world unless Aegon agreed to peace. We'll probably never learn the truth, but let me know your favorite theory regarding Nymor's letter. Aegon would rule for another 24 years, but the conflict in Dorne was his final war. His goal was to make each region of Westeros feel unified as one great big realm. So the Targaryens brokered marriages between families from different regions. Rhaenyra Arryn married a Stark daughter. Loren Lannister's heir married a Redwyne daughter. The triplet daughters of Tarth were married to houses Corbray, Hightower, and even Harlaw in the Iron Islands. Visenya even arranged a double wedding between houses Blackwood and Bracken, families who were eternal enemies. A son from each family wed a daughter from the other. Of course, peace between the Blackwoods and the Brackens did not last very long. Aegon's sisters helped him in every aspect of governance. Besides Queen Alysanne, Visenya and Rhaenys were the most influential queens in Targaryen history. Wherever Aegon went, one of his sisters went with him, while the other remained in King's Landing or Dragonstone to rule. Until Rhaenys died in Dorne, of course. It is said that Aegon married Rhaenys, his younger sister, for love, and he married Visenya, his older sister, for duty. He didn't feel the need to choose, but once Rhaenys died, he was stuck with Visenya. Aegon spent half of his time split between King's Landing and Dragonstone, though he much preferred Dragonstone, which was larger at the time, safer, and smelled of smoke and brimstone. It was the place he loved best. The other half of his time was spent on royal tours, as he visited castle after castle, believing that visiting each region in person, with his fear-inducing dragon, would stop rebellions before they even arose. Aegon made a point of not interfering with the customs of each kingdom. He didn't care about ruling the entire continent uniformly with an iron fist. He wanted each region to have its unique characteristics. This policy had positives and severe negatives. On the upside, lords were not forced to convert their religion or their laws, and lords who practiced First Night could continue doing so. All Aegon cared about was peace. He said, "The first law of the land shall be the king's peace, and any lord who goes to war without my leave shall be considered a rebel and an enemy of the Iron Throne." The downside of this lax policy would rear its head in the succession of his own dynasty. Aegon did not establish a royal inheritance law. Succession in Westeros is purposefully unclear because questionable inheritance equals more conflict equals more story to tell. George Martin has said that the laws of inheritance in the Seven Kingdoms were vague, uncodified, subject to varying interpretations, and often contradictory. The custom everywhere but Dorne is that the eldest living son inherits, but a daughter inherits before an uncle. In Dorne, the eldest child inherits regardless of gender. That's for lords, however, not the crown. Aegon could have chosen either of these laws, or he could have made a new law stating that each king will declare his own heir. Since there was no law, it was just a massive gray area. The expectation was that the eldest son would always inherit, but expectations can be subverted.
Disappointing. No epic, I don't know, one of those.
There are no better writers in television than Dan Weiss and David Benioff. They ended it brilliantly, better than I could have imagined, and you people are in for it.
For example, when Aegon died, Visenya wished for Maegor to succeed him, despite being younger than Aenys. Maegor was stronger, and therefore the more rightful ruler, in her view. When both of Jaehaerys' sons died, He had no idea what to do, so he called a great council. When Viserys grew tired of his brother Daemon, he named his daughter Rhaenyra his heir, and kept her as heir even when he fathered sons. So in just a single century, you've got 3 different inheritance plans. Whoever can take the throne deserves the throne, the lords get to decide who sits the throne, and the king gets to decide who sits the throne. If Aegon established a clear succession law, maybe the Dance of the Dragons never happens. Aegon made a point of being extremely supportive of the faith. Aegon himself was not religious, but he made all holy men and women, along with their land and holdings, exempt from taxes. He also preserved the faith's right to independently bring justice to their own holy people accused of crimes, like Septons and Silent Sisters. It was smart to keep the faith on side, since Aegon not only practiced incest, but also polygamy. Keeping them happy keeps the peace, and all Aegon cared about was peace. In the initial years of Aegon's reign, King's Landing grew rapidly and disorderly. Nothing was planned, and it grew from a small village to the 3rd most populous city in the realm in only 25 years. The city didn't even have walls, but Aegon decided to build some after hearing about what happened in Tall Tree's town, down in the Summer Isles, where pirates sacked the city and carried off thousands into slavery. Aegon realized that without strong walls, the same thing could happen to King's Landing whenever he and Visenya were not there to guard it. Aegon's first hand of the king was Orys Baratheon, his bastard half-brother, who became Lord Paramount of the Stormlands after killing Argilac Durrandon. But after he lost his hand in Dorne, Orys resigned as Aegon's hand, saying that the king's hand should have a hand. I will not have men speaking of the king's stump. After Orys, Edmund Tully was hand, but he went back to Riverrun after his wife died to raise his kids. Then Alton Celtigar was hand, but he died from being old. His 4th hand was Osmond Strong, and his final hand was Alan Stokeworth. The small council as we know it wasn't fully developed until Jaehaerys' reign, but Aegon did consult his maesters. He appointed masters of coin for taxation and economic concerns, and he even consulted the High Septon in Oldtown regarding religious matters. But of course, Aegon relied most heavily on his sisters. Before her death, Queen Rhaenys was generous and just. Rhaenys showered her favorite singers with gifts, and showed love to women and small folk. Once, while sitting the Iron Throne, a man was brought before her who beat his wife to death. The man claimed it was lawful since he caught his wife cheating on him. However, he struck her 100 times with an iron rod, which was overkill. Rhaenys decided that the first 6 blows were legal, in accordance with the 7 faces of God, the 7th being the stranger, whose face is death, and therefore doesn't count, I guess. But the other 94 hits were illegal, so Rhaenys let the dead wife's brothers beat the husband 94 times. Thus was established the Rule of 6. Queen Visenya was not as kind as her sister. There was a darkness in Visenya. She wore the grim, unforgiving face of a warrior, and her beauty had an edge to it. During Aegon's reign, no one protected the king like she did. Twice, she defended Aegon wielding Dark Sister against Dornish assassins. Visenya trusted no one except her brother, and wore chainmail beneath her clothes day and night. Aegon refused to do the same, which made Visenya furious. Even with Blackfire in your hand, you are only one man, Visenya told him, and I cannot always be with you. Aegon responded that he had guards to protect himself. So, to prove her point, Visenya slashed Aegon across his cheek with Dark Sister, before his guards could even react. This caused Aegon to establish the Kingsguard, a brotherhood of 7 knights, whose vows Visenya modeled after the Night's Watch vows. No wife, no children, no land, no reward but honor. Queen Visenya chose the first 7 herself. Aegon had 2 sons. First came Aenys in 7 AC, a small and sickly infant. He had small eyes and spindly limbs, and cried for a fortnight after being weaned from Rhaenys' breast. People whispered that Aenys must be the son of one of the many singers or mummers who Rhaenys entertained. He was so unlike Aegon. However, Aenys' health improved immediately after bonding with his dragon, Quicksilver. Years later, Aenys' daughter Rhaena was a timid and unsociable child, but after bonding with Dreamfire, she became outgoing and fierce. Years after that, Jaehaerys' young daughter Daenerys was dying of a plague, and Jaehaerys had an epiphany that she must be given a dragon hatchling immediately. So this suggests that the supernatural dragon bond can heal the rider and change their personality drastically. In 12 AC, Visenya gave birth to Maegor. She was believed to be infertile for so long, but Maegor was born nearly twice the size of his older brother Aenys. Some theories suggest Maegor was a product of Visenya's sorcery, so it's possible that Aenys was a bastard and Maegor was a sorcery baby, and Aegon had no true sons. If this is the case, then the bloodline passed from Aenys, a bastard, all the way to Jon Snow, another Targaryen bastard, if Rhaegar and Lyanna are his parents. That would be some cool symbolism or something. Maegor was raised on Dragonstone by Visenya, while Aegon kept Aenys close, as his heir. Wherever Aegon went on tour, Aenys came with, even to Sunspear on the 10th anniversary of Aegon's peace with Dorne. According to the wisdom of old Valyria, the blood of the dragon must remain pure. This means that the Dragon Lords married brother to sister whenever possible, and some of them took multiple wives as well, though that wasn't common. Valyrians honored 1,000 gods, but feared none of them. They were Dragon Lords, closer to gods than to men. What could they have to fear? So when Aegon conquered Westeros, he found a land ruled by the doctrines of the faith. Incest was a vile sin, and Aegon was married to not one, but 2 of his sisters. He did his best to avoid conflicts with the faith. Aegon had no daughters, so his first son Aenys was married to Alyssa Velaryon, and his second son Maegor married Ceryse Hightower. By having Maegor marry a Hightower in the Starry Sept, Aegon made a public showing of his respect for the faith. Ironically, Maegor would return to Oldtown 16 years later and threaten to burn down the Starry Sept with his father's dragon. Aegon struck a perfect balance between doing what he wanted, because he's the king, while not going out of his way to anger people like the faith for no good reason. When Aenys became king and had his son and daughter marry each other, he was surprised at the negative reaction to incest. He shouldn't have been surprised, because years earlier, the faith warned Aegon the Conqueror that a marriage between Maegor and his niece Rhaena would not be cool. Aegon, wanting to avoid conflict wherever possible, chose to wed Maegor to a Hightower. Aenys was the opposite of his father. He was too dumb to realize that incest would make people angry. He was too stubborn to change his mind about the incest, and he was too weak to stop the rebellions in protest of incest. It really makes one appreciate how Aegon the Conqueror was able to politically maneuver around conflict, while simultaneously not being afraid to use his dragon when conflict did arise. In 35 AC, Aegon decided that the Aegon Fort was no longer fit for a king. This is what early King's Landing looked like, with the Aegon Fort built of wood, and the burgeoning city beyond. He moved permanently back to Dragonstone while the Red Keep was being built. Aegon left Queen Visenya in King's Landing to oversee the construction. But some people joked that Aegon left Visenya behind so he wouldn't have to endure her presence on Dragonstone. 2 years later, at the age of 64, Aegon the Conqueror died of a stroke at the Painted Table. He was showing his grandsons, Aegon and Viserys, details of his conquest of Westeros. His son Maegor gave the eulogy, while Aegon's body was set aflame on his funeral pyre. They dressed him in battle armor, with Blackfire clasped in his hands. Of course, fire cannot harm Valyrian steel, so Maegor went back to retrieve Blackfire after the funeral. Visenya's dragon Vhagar lit the pyre, and thus Aegon Targaryen's story came to an end. He was survived by his older sister Visenya, his sons Aenys and Maegor, and Aenys' 5 children. At 30 years of age, Aenys ascended the throne as the second king of Westeros, and one of the worst ones too. I already did a video about him. Let me know in the comments how good of a ruler you think Aegon was. Should he have been stricter with the faith, or was his steadfast focus on peace always the best plan? Thanks for watching and subscribing.